Hey, how's it going? This is a review project. I decided to do a video, and I'm doing Unit 5 Heredity, and don't have to show my face, so you're just gonna get this hand, which is looks oddly shaded. Anyway, so Unit 5 Heredity. So basically, heredity is like the basic part of the genetics. You know, you inherit something from your parents, like some kind of trait, and that was all pretty much basically figured out by this one guy, this monk. His name was Gregor Mendel. He was working with some pea plants in a garden, and he started noticing, hey, some of those, some pea plants have traits that they pass, that their offspring have, while others that have different parents don't have that trait. And he sort of has ended up creating this system. And well, this is a lot, and also the thing is, this is before like a lot of like modern things that we associate with genetics were like discovered. So that's why it's a big thing. So basically, he just sort of, yeah. So basically, each gene has like these, like each trait has like these things called alleles, and they can be dominant or recessive. If it's a dominant, the recessive ain't gonna show, and then you got heterozygous. So basically, you have homozygous, which is both the same. So it's either both dominant allele, both recessive allele, and then you got heterozygous, which is one dominant, one recessive. The recessive never shows on those. And basically, a monohybrid cross is just like, basically that's how it crosses. Basically, if it's just you're doing like, it's like we all remember those Punnett squares that we reviewed, like we looked at. You know, it's like you got like the little a kind of thing. You know, all that. Basically, like one of those for like one trait would be monohybrid cross. However, if you get two traits in there, like say tall stem, green leaves, then you're getting a dihybrid cross. And basically, and this all works on like simple probability rules, like the probability of one and the other multiplied would make the same. That's how you get the probability that of this specific like thing. So basically, however, thanks to like modern research since Mendel, we know now that it's a little bit more complicated than he originally made it out. But you can't blame the guy. He was working like before a lot of this technology was even developed. But basically, we found out there's incomplete dominance, which is a heterozygous phenotype that's in between dominant recessive alleles. There's codominance, which both phenotypes are expressed in heterozygotes. Some genes can have more than two alleles, and then there's pleiotropy, where one gene can affect multiple phenotypes. A phenotype is like the physical trait, like say blue eyes or brown hair or something like that. Genotype is the actual gene. And sometimes there's a thing called epistasis, where the expression of a phenotype, basically like one gene can affect the expression of, like one gene's phenotype can, like the expression of one phenotype, that gene can influence the expression of another gene. And then sometimes a phenotype, like trait thing, can be affected by two or more genes. That's called polygenic inheritance. However, genes aren't the only thing that affect like how you sort of like look and stuff, because there's environmental influences. Like say you like are in the sun a lot, so your hair gets kind of bleached blonde a bit, and you get like tanner skin because of it. So basically that, and that's just and like I said, great. I'm not too good at this. Sometimes basically things that are influenced by both, basically their overall phenotype, an organism's overall phenotype is influenced by both their genotype and their unique environmental history. So now I gotta explain what pedigrees are. Basically, it's a family tree. It helps sort of track certain genetic traits through the generations of a family, and you can see if the kids could inherit any like genetic disorders, because sometimes a genetic disorder won't show in like a person in one generation, but they might still have it because most genetic disorders are recessive. These people that have them but have the trait but aren't showing it, they're called carriers. Like there's like for example, yeah. Some genetic disorders, like sickle cell, like you're probably wondering, like why would something like that like continue to exist, like be like breeded in? Well, it turns out you kind of get resistance to malaria, which is generally a good thing to have, especially when you live in a place that deals with malaria a lot. That's probably why that's still kicking these days. And of course, if like a disorder or disease is like lethal, like it's probably not gonna last too long in the gene pool, because most times the people will die before they can pass it down. But if one of those things happens to show up like pretty late in life, it probably would be passed down. A lot of human diseases are what we call multifactorial, because like genetics influence it, the environment influences it, just general things like that. And there's actually some ways, if you are worried about, oh, what if my kids get the whatever, because my grandpa had the whatever. There's a few things that you can do. There's genetic counselors. They use family histories to figure out the probability of children having certain genetic disorders. And then you have amniocentesis and cryonic villus, villus sampling. Basically, those are two things that you can do to figure out if you're already pregnant and you got the thing in there, the fetus, the baby, and you can figure out, using those, you can figure out if the baby has inherited anything. So yeah. However, there's something more at play here, because now we're going to talk about chromosomes, because we didn't know about chromosomes until later. But because we built better microscopes, and just technology advanced, and we were able to figure out some find out new things about the microscopic world, about how cells work and genetic and genes, and we found these things about chromosomes, and basically, we now know that chromosomes are basically tied to genes. The other way around, genes are tied to chromosomes. But we didn't know that at first, and the guy who figured this out was a scientist. His name was Morgan. He was working with the eye color gene in fruit flies, and he figured out how chromosomes can sort of influence that, and that led to the chromosome theory of inheritance. Basically, it means that genes have specific positions along chromosomes. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And the chromosomes are basically the sort of puppet masters of the process. Sex, biological sex, is often a chromosomally based. Humans and other mammals have this XY system. So we got two X's means girl, XY means boy. Other animals have different systems. In fact, some animals, there's some frogs, some fish, some invertebrates. Basically, they can just straight up change biological sex depending on the situation, which is an interesting thing, that's for sure. And a lot of sex chromosomes carry sex-like genes. They're pretty much all of them, nearly all of them, are on the X chromosome. However, because girls have two X's, that sort of cancels it out. But guys who only have that XY, so they only got one X, they tend to show it. Like hemophilia. I'm going a bit off track here with the chapter, but if I remember correctly, hemophilia is basically like it passes down from mother to son. The mothers never get like show it, but the sons do. Probably because of that. I could be wrong though. Basically, like how genes are ordered on a chromosome and how far they are apart from each other. Basically, that can be figured out from like recombination frequencies that are observed when you're genetically crossing genes. This data, like the data from this, can also help make a sort of like map of like, oh, this is like so and so genes here, so and so genes here, yada 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 yada. And the further genes are like apart, the more likely their allele combinations will be recombined when they're crossing over. Now here's a few things that can happen wrong during meiosis when it comes to chromosomes. Because this non-disjunction happens in meiosis, and that results in an abnormal chromosome number. The special term that scientists made for it is called aneuploidy. I might be mispronouncing it, but there's like some more specific types. Like you got trisomy, where a zygote has an extra copy of a chromosome. Monosomy, a zygote's missing a copy of a chromosome. And you got polyploidy. That's fun to say, where a zygote has more than 2 complete sets of chromosomes. And then chromosomes can also break. That can happen, and that can like alter the structure. Like things can get deleted, like certain things can get deleted. There's things can duplicate, things can invert. There's also translocations, and changes in like the number of chromosomes per cell, or like in the structure of an individual chromosome. Like that can affect the phenotype. It can even lead to disorders. Like probably the most famous example is Down syndrome, which is what happens when this 21st chromosome for humans experiences trisomy, and so yeah, that's what happens with Down syndrome. And there's also genomic imprinting. That's when like the phenotypic effects of a small number of particular genes depend on which allele is inherited from which parent. This happens in mammals, like only in mammals. Basically, like one of the alleles isn't expressed in the offspring from like one parent, then the alleles from the other parent are, like say your dad is blonde, your mom has like red hair, and just the kid and you have red hair. That means that your mom's hair color allele like trait beat out your dad's. So yeah, that's basically yeah. And then this is sort of a little side thing, but the genes present in mitochondria and plastids, how those are inherited, depends solely on your mother, because, fun fact, the zygote cytoplasm containing those little bits and bobbles comes from the egg cell, from the mother's egg cell. So yeah, this has been the video. Signing off. Have a nice whatever.